Hi, ArcfieldWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Monday morning, January the 15th. A lot to talk about this morning. Last week we talked about a couple of opportunities for accumulating snow in that DC to Philadelphia to New York City corridor. Indeed, it looks like that is coming to fruition with some snow today, tonight, and tomorrow. And then another threat comes on Friday. That second system late this week will usher in an Arctic blast for the upcoming weekend throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, the Northeast U.S. Next week, temperatures look like they'll relax. We'll have some kind of a warm-up across much of the nation, but I do believe that will just be temporary. Certainly, there are reasons to believe that we'll have additional Arctic air outbreaks late January, during the month of February, and perhaps even into March. A lot to talk about. Again, let's start off here taking a look at the stratospheric temperatures. This is stratospheric temperature forecast map for later this week, about Wednesday, Thursday time frame. And first of all, let's orient ourselves right. This is the U.S. down here and Canada here. And again, this is for late this week, let's say around the Thursday time frame. The North Pole right in this region right here. And what this shows is a couple things. First of all, yet another stratospheric warming event is unfolding. These come in bursts where the stratospheric temperatures around the 10 millibar level tend to warm up relative to normal and then drop off and warm up again. And here's another burst coming later this week into the end of the work week here. And that tells me that indeed we will have additional cold air outbreaks, additional Arctic air masses into the U.S. as we mentioned before in several of the videos before. The stratospheric warming events tend to have impact across the U.S. with respect to temperature pattern maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks later. So here we go again, another surge in the stratospheric warming. Tells me we'll have more Arctic air outbreaks in the month of February and perhaps going into March as well. Another interesting feature here, this is really a piece of the polar vortex that slides all the way into southern Canada during the week, and that kind of sets the stage for this late week storm snow threat in the Mid-Atlantic region, the Friday night time frame. And oftentimes with the actual polar vortex dropping into southern Canada, that could really become quite an interesting situation indeed. Right now it looks like maybe a minor to a moderate event on Friday, but that could become a stronger system here whenever you see a polar vortex like this, that strong upper level low dropping into southern Canada or the northern U.S. So we'll have to certainly watch over the next few days the potential for this system around Friday of this week. Well, let's take a look at a couple other features here before we get to the synoptic scale situation now on El Nino. Again, we've talked about the likelihood for El Nino to kind of shift from an east-based El Nino to more of a central base, and indeed that has occurred. It looks like it will continue to be the case over the second half of the winter season. And by the way, looking ahead, there are many signs that convince me that this El Nino will be rather short-lived and will flip to a La Nina by the tropical season for sure, the latter part of the spring into the early part of the summer. That in turn will likely lead to a very active Atlantic Basin tropical season. Again, El Nino will tend to weaken later in the winter going through the spring and completely flip from El Nino to La Nina by the time we get to the latter part of the spring, the tropical season, the early part of the summer. This is a look at the temperature pattern in the central part of the Pacific Ocean right now. This is what we call Nino 3.4 section of the tropical Pacific. And notice here about a plus 1.5 degree delta with normal out in the central part of the Pacific Ocean. Meanwhile, in the eastern part, just off the west coast of South America, it's closer to 0.5. So about a degree difference relative to normal. The central part, again, higher, warmer temperatures compared to normal. as compared with the eastern sections. And that tends to, whenever you have the El Nino, that kind of shifts to the central part with its main focus area, the central part of the Pacific, that kind of increases the chance that you can get colder air masses into the eastern states. If you have a full-fledged, strong El Nino just off the west coast of South America, that oftentimes just floods the nation with warmer than normal conditions. That is not going to be the case for the rest of the winter season here. Again, more of a centrally based El Nino that favors additional cold air masses to make their way into the eastern part of the U.S. Now, we talked last week about a pretty big transition occurring in the teleconnection indices known as the Arctic Oscillation and North Atlantic Oscillation. These are teleconnection indices that give us a clue as to what's going on in the North Atlantic, the Arctic region in terms of the overall temperature and precipitation pattern. Oftentimes, when these two are in negative territory and make a quick shift back up to neutral or even positive territory, there are storm systems along the eastern seaboard. And indeed, we have this system in the Monday-Tuesday time frame, and then potentially a stronger system late this week around Friday or so. And that is indeed a transition right here. We're going from negative, the red is the forecast, all the way up to positive territory over the next week to 10 days or so. Then notice it starts to drop off again. And again, we mentioned earlier in this video, expect a relaxation in temperatures next week after this weekend bitter cold Arctic blast in the Mid-Atlantic in the northeast U.S. That warm up next week, not permanent. It looks like the AO, and we'll see in a moment here, the NAO do rise up in a positive territory, but then they'll drop off, and I believe certainly by the time we get to the early part of February, they'll probably be back in negative territory. And here we go. This is the North Atlantic Oscillation. Again, like its closely related cousin, the AO, quite a transition here over the next week to 10 days or so. And indeed, we'll have a couple of systems along the eastern seaboard. It transitions from negative territory back up to positive. And then it too also starts to turn negative here, or at least a drop off from positive, likely reaching negative territory by the time we get to the early part of February. And when both of these indices are in negative territory this time of the year for a sustained period of time, that tends to be correlated with high latitude blocking over places like Greenland and Iceland. That in turn generally favors colder and snowier conditions in the eastern part of the U.S. Well, now let's take a look here at some forecast maps using the 500 millibar height anomaly forecast map from last night's 0Z Ensemble Run of the European model. Certainly this jumps out at you here. This is that high latitude blocking that's going on right now. Again, the AO and NAO deeply in negative territory as we speak here, beginning the new week here on January 15th. A lot of blocking over Greenland, northern Canada, and a deep upper level trough centered over the southern part of Canada, excuse me, extending into the northern U.S. Now, let's push forward here and watch what happens. We have this storm system Monday and Tuesday, and then kind of a rotation around here by later this week. And then we have this intensification of that upper level system over the Great Lakes. Again, that's kind of a piece of the polar vortex dropping all the way down into the southern part of Canada, the Great Lakes region, and that can certainly result in a stronger system than is currently predicted by the models. Friday night time frame right in this region right here. Again, quite an impressive upper level low feature here, and that second accumulating snow event for DC, Philadelphia, New York City, and the surrounding regions of the Mid-Atlantic comes at the end of the week, and it will be followed by an Arctic blast into the Mid-Atlantic Northeast U.S. for the upcoming weekend. Now, let's quickly go ahead into next week, and again, we mentioned there will certainly be a relaxation of temperatures. You can see ridging starting to set up again over the eastern U.S. to Great Lakes region by the time we get to a week from right now. This is early next week. It still may be very cold into, let's say, Monday of next week. But later next week, there will no doubt be a warm-up across much of the central and eastern U.S. However, as we mentioned earlier, that will not be permanent. It looks like we'll certainly get back into some cold air outbreaks later in January and going into the month of February. Well, let's now take a look at the 850 millibar temperature anomalies from last night's Ensemble Run of the European. Now, this is going back a few days, all the way. I kind of wanted to backtrack to last Friday just to show what we were looking at last week. And we talked about intense cold across the western part of Canada, all the way from British Columbia to Saskatchewan. And indeed, there were some incredible temperatures, 50 degrees below zero in places like Edmonton, Alberta in Canada, and certainly the extreme cold extended all the way into Montana and the central part of the U.S., all the way down to Texas, as a matter of fact, Dallas, Texas, in the middle teens, and Kansas City yesterday only made it up to -3 degrees for its high. Below zero high temperature yesterday, Sunday, in Kansas City. That hasn't happened for several decades. But this cold air started western Canada, moved down into Montana, where there were some reports of all-time record lows in Montana, western part of Canada as well. All-time record lows in some places. And it dove all the way down into Texas yesterday. For example, all the way down into Dallas. It was down into the middle, the actual air temperature down to the middle teens in Dallas, and it certainly extended back into the eastern part of the U.S. on the heels of an Arctic frontal passage on Sunday that produced some snow shower activity. And we'll see here going forward. This is now tomorrow morning that it kind of reasserts itself into the eastern states, and then with that second system on Friday, that will usher in yet another very, very cold air mass. This is the Friday afternoon forecast map, and it just pushes into the east, and this indeed will be very, very cold conditions. Certainly, I believe single-digit lows are on the table in the I-95 corridor region, maybe Sunday morning, maybe Monday morning, maybe even Saturday morning as well. And by that time, there'll be very likely snow cover in even in the big cities of D.C., Philadelphia, New York City. So very, very cold air mass coming in for the upcoming weekend. Now, looking ahead, it does warm up. Here we go all the way into a week from right now, next Monday, and you're starting to see a lot of warm up over the northern plains, just beginning here in the eastern part of the nation, but certainly it looks like a relaxation in temperatures. This is all the way out to next Tuesday, and that will certainly be a warm up, albeit a temporary warm up. More cold air outbreaks are destined to arrive in the central and eastern U.S. later this month, going well into the month of February, given that ongoing stratospheric warming event. Now, let's take a look at the upper level jet streak, because it's very interesting what happened in D.C. and Baltimore earlier today. There was this initial burst of snow, coating to maybe up to an inch or so in parts of the D.C. metro area, all the way up to northern Maryland, places like Baltimore. This is the forecast map from last night's run of the GFS, the conventional GFS. This is the Sunday evening forecast map. I kind of want to, again, backtrack here and take a look at the jet streak, because the burst of snow earlier today associated with an upper level jet streak, and then there'll be kind of a second wave with another upper level jet streak. And you can kind of see that well modeled here by last night's GFS model. Now, this is early this morning. Notice this 250 millibar jet streak right here, and here we go. This is early today, and again, this is what helped to cause that initial burst of snow in D.C. and Baltimore early today. There will be a lull later this morning into the early part of the afternoon down across D.C. as it kind of backtracks, and we'll see why here. This upper level jet streak kind of pushes off to the east, and then here we go. This is the next jet streak coming in tonight and tomorrow. Quite impressive indeed. So that snow this morning was just the initial one associated with a kind of a front-running upper-level jet streak. DC, Baltimore. It'll backtrack to the south and west over the next few hours, and then snow redevelops later on today and especially tonight into tomorrow morning. Now, let's take a look at the surface forecast maps from the 0Z run of the GFS. This is the forecast map from 0Z last night for 7 a.m. this morning, and here is that snow correctly depicted by the GFS model run all the way up to northern Maryland. Again, DC, Baltimore got maybe a coating to an inch or so associated with that front-running jet streak. Then it kind of backtracks, and again, a lull in the precipitation over DC and Baltimore late morning, early afternoon, and then that next jet streak really starts to help intensify low pressure off the coastline right here, and snow kind of explodes over the Mid-Atlantic region late today, early tonight, continues well into the morning hours. And by the way, this should be kind of a light, fluffy snow, given the fact that we are in an Arctic air mass, cold, dry, leading to light, fluffy snow. And I'm thinking 2 to 4 inches on average, DC, Philadelphia, New York City, between now and midday on Tuesday. Isolated 5-inch amounts certainly on the table here. Continues to snow throughout much of the night here in the Mid-Atlantic region. And again, light, fluffy snow as low pressure intensifies. Continues into midday, certainly north of the Mason-Dixon line. It could very well continue into midday, early afternoon, and then that gets on out of here and very cold behind it. And then we'll start to take a look at the late week potential snow event. Here it's Thursday night into the day on Friday. Right now, a system by the GFS not all that impressive looking here. Indeed, there still should be some accumulating snow on Friday, but we'll take a closer look at this over the next few days. I think this is probably underdoing it, and it may turn out to be a stronger system. Certainly still more accumulating snow on the table for Friday night in the Mid-Atlantic region. And here we go, going into the upcoming weekend. This is very early Saturday morning. This is a kind of a direct discharge of Arctic air from eastern Canada into the northeast U.S., into the Mid-Atlantic region, all the way down into the Carolinas. We've often talked about these dashed blue lines here, these thickness lines. Notice this thickness right here, 498. You can see that right here, 498 thickness. Kind of a rule of thumb is to take these numbers here. This is 540, kind of translates to, let's say, 40 degrees. 528, maybe like 28 degrees. Anytime you're below 500, you're below zero in general. It's kind of a rule of thumb to use here. So we're looking at a potential below zero conditions, certainly upstate New York over the upcoming weekend. And again, I could see single digits for the I-95 corridor region Sunday morning, perhaps, maybe Monday morning, maybe even Saturday morning on the backside of that snow event on Friday night. And this Arctic air mass will likely be coming into the Mid-Atlantic region that will finally have some snow cover, and that will certainly exacerbate the effects of that Arctic air. Again, it pulls out. Let's go ahead a little bit here into the early part of next week, and by this time that Arctic high moves overhead. This is Sunday afternoon, and then you can see right here on the backside by a week from right now, next Monday, you're starting to see this flow of air on the backside out of the southwest, and that will promote warming first over the northern plains, then over the Great Lakes, and finally into the eastern states later next week. But that will not be a permanent change to warmer than normal conditions. We certainly look like we'll have some more Arctic air outbreaks. So a couple of systems causing accumulating snow this week over DC, Philadelphia, New York City. The first one has already begun. We'll really get underway tonight into tomorrow morning, and then a second system at the end of the week, Friday night time frame, and that will be followed by an intense Arctic blast into the Mid-Atlantic, into the northeastern states. That's it for now. For ArcfieldWeather.com, this has been meteorologist Paul Dorian.